Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling a case that's both heartbreaking and unsettling.
Yeah.
The disappearance of Germaine Charlo.
Right.
Our primary source is an article from Investor titled The Haunting Case of Germaine Charlo, a call for justice and awareness.
It's a case that really opens up a much larger conversation, unfortunately.
Right. It goes way beyond just one missing person.
Yeah.
But before we get into that,
Sure.
let's paint a picture of Germaine's life.
Okay.
She was only 23,
Wow.
a mother of two, and the article really emphasizes that she was vibrant,
Right.
full of life,
Yeah.
not just a name on a missing poster.
Definitely not.
She loved fishing, being outdoors,
Yeah.
art. She even had dreams of attending the Institute of American Indian Arts.
It's so crucial to remember that Germaine had passions, goals,
Right.
a whole future ahead of her.
Yeah.
And that future was stolen. Yeah.
And that theft happened on June 15th, 2018.
Wow.
That's when Germaine vanished without a trace from Missoula, Montana.
Missoula.
Just walked out into the night and was never seen again.
It's crazy.
Her phone went silent.
Oh, wow.
No activity.
Really?
Nothing.
That detail always gets me in this day and age, with everyone constantly connected, for a phone to just go dark.
I know.
It's chilling.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the circumstances surrounding her disappearance only add to the mystery.
Yeah.
The article says she was out socializing with friends, hitting some bars in downtown Missoula. Surveillance footage last caught her outside the Badlander bar
The Badlander.
around midnight.
Okay.
Now here's where it gets even more puzzling.
Okay.
She was with her ex-partner, Michael DeFrance,
Okay.
the father of her children.
Right.
He claims he dropped her off near a friend's house.
But she never made it there?
Nope. Gone like a ghost. It's like she just disappeared.
The article details the massive search efforts that followed family volunteers, law enforcement, all coming through the area, desperate for any sign of her.
It's a vast area.
They even brought in Detective Guy Baker.
Detective Baker.
Who really seems dedicated to cracking this case.
He seems like a good guy.
He's explored every angle: domestic violence, human trafficking, everything.
Hey.
But 6 years later,
Still nothing.
still nothing.
You know,
Just unbelievable.
when we talk about these vast, rugged landscapes, it's easy to romanticize them.
Right.
But for search and rescue teams, and especially for families waiting for answers, that beauty becomes a nightmare.
It does.
Every tree, every ravine becomes another place where someone could be lost.
Right. It's terrifying.
Yes.
And you brought up something important there, the landscape. Because this is where Germaine's story intersects with a much larger and deeply troubling reality.
Right.
Her case is sadly not an isolated incident.
Tragically, it's part of a pattern.
Exactly. The article points out this horrifying statistic. Indigenous women make up a staggering 24%
74%.
of Montana's missing persons cases.
That's unbelievable.
Think about that for a second.
Yeah.
They represent only 6% of the state's population.
6%.
Yet nearly a quarter of all missing persons are Indigenous women.
That disparity is not a coincidence.
Right.
It's a direct result of systemic issues that have plagued Indigenous communities for generations.
So we're talking about...
We're talking about the lasting impacts of colonization.
Wow.
Forced assimilation.
Okay.
And ongoing discrimination.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that a bit.
Sure.
What are some of the specific ways these historical injustices translate into such a disproportionate number of missing Indigenous women today?
Well, for starters, think about the jurisdictional complexities on tribal lands.
Okay.
Often there are multiple agencies involved.
Oh, wow.
Tribal police,
Right.
federal agencies,
Yeah.
sometimes even county or state.
I see.
This can lead to confusion, delays, and a lack of coordinated effort,
Right.
which is crucial in missing person cases.
So it's not just about resources.
Right.
It's also about how those resources are managed or mismanaged due to these complicated jurisdictional lines.
Exactly.
And you layer on top of that the historical distrust that many Indigenous communities have towards law enforcement.
Makes sense.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, given the history of forced assimilation, broken treaties, and often outright violence,
That's a long history.
it's understandable why there might be reluctance to cooperate with authorities.
Absolutely.
Right.
And that lack of trust can make it even harder to get accurate information, to build relationships with witnesses, to conduct thorough investigations.
I see.
It's a vicious cycle.
And it feels like all of this is compounded by another factor that we see all too often.
What's that?
A lack of media attention. Cases involving Indigenous women just don't seem to garner the same level of national outrage or coverage as other missing person cases.
You're absolutely right.
It's really frustrating.
It's almost as if these stories are invisible to the mainstream media and as a result to a large segment of the public. And that lack of visibility makes it even easier for these cases to slip through the cracks, for investigations to stall, for justice to be denied.
It's like a double injustice.
Precisely.
First, the vulnerability due to these systemic factors, and then when someone goes missing, they're further marginalized by being ignored by the very systems that are supposed to protect them.
And that's why Germaine's case and the work her family is doing to keep her story in the spotlight is so important.
I agree.
It's about demanding accountability, yes, but it's also about forcing society to acknowledge this wider problem, to see these women as human beings, worthy of our attention and our concern.
Definitely.
It's about saying their names. Their lives matter.
They do.
And that's where the symbol of the red hand comes in, right? It's become a powerful symbol for this movement.
You know, I have seen that image, but to be honest, I didn't fully grasp its meaning.
It's haunting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Each red handprint represents a missing or murdered Indigenous woman.
Wow.
It's a stark visual reminder of this sheer scale of this crisis.
Yeah, it's a way of cutting through the statistics, the news reports, and making you confront the human cost.
Exactly.
The individual lives lost.
These aren't just numbers. These are mothers' daughters.
Sisters, friends.
It's awful.
And each handprint represents a family shattered.
Oh, wow.
A community left wondering.
Right.
And a case that often goes unsolved.
That feeling of not knowing, of having no closure.
It's unimaginable.
I can't even imagine the pain.
And it speaks to another layer of this crisis.
What's that?
The lack of adequate resources dedicated to investigating these cases.
So we've got jurisdictional issues, historical distrust, lack of media attention, and now a lack of resources.
It's a lot.
It's almost like every system is failing these women.
Unfortunately, that's often the case.
Yeah.
But in the face of all this, you have families like Germaine's who refuse to be silenced.
It's amazing.
They refuse to let their loved ones be forgotten.
The article really highlights their incredible strength and resilience.
Yeah, they're incredible.
Germaine's aunt
Belinda
has become such a powerful advocate.
She's amazing.
Keeping her memory alive.
Pushing for answers.
Yeah.
They're organizing searches. Holding vigils, doing everything they can to keep the pressure on.
It's so inspiring.
Yeah.
They're not just waiting for someone else to fix it. They're taking action, demanding justice, and shining a light on this issue so that others don't have to endure the same pain.
And in a way, their fight for Germaine becomes a fight for all missing and murdered Indigenous women, right?
Absolutely. They're raising awareness, pushing for policy changes, and demanding that law enforcement take these cases seriously.
And what about that surveillance footage?
Oh, yeah.
That was released. Could that be a breakthrough in the case?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
It's a long shot. But any bit of new information, any lead, could potentially be the key to unlocking the mystery of what happened to Germaine that night.
It makes you think about all those other cases out there where there might be a piece of evidence, a witness something that could break the case wide open, but it's just waiting to be discovered.
Exactly.
Crazy.
And that's why public awareness is so critical. The more people who know Germaine's story, who understand the broader issue, the greater the chance that someone out there might have that crucial piece of information.
It could be anything, really.
It could be.
The article ends with a call to action, listing ways for people to get involved.
Oh, wow.
What resonated most with you from that list?
You know, for me, it's the emphasis on pushing for legislative change. We need better policies, more funding for investigations, and stronger laws to protect Indigenous women. This isn't just a local issue. It's a national crisis that demands a national response.
I think for me, it's the reminder that we all have a voice.
Yeah.
And we can use it to amplify these stories, to put pressure on those in power, and to demand justice.
Even just sharing Germaine's story on social media, talking to friends and family about this issue, donating to organizations that are working on the ground.
Yeah.
These actions may seem small.
Yeah.
But they can make a difference.
It's about creating a ripple effect, right? One person tells another who tells another, and suddenly you've got a wave of awareness and action.
Power.
Pushing for change.
And that's what gives me hope.
Yeah.
That seeing people come together, refusing to be silent, and demanding a better future for Indigenous communities.
So if we take a step back from the specifics of Germaine's case, what are the key takeaways we want our listener to walk away with?
For me, it's the understanding that this crisis is deeply rooted in systemic issues. That it's not just a series of isolated incidents. It's about acknowledging the historical and ongoing injustices that have made Indigenous women so vulnerable.
And it's about recognizing that these aren't just statistics. These are real people with families, with dreams, with lives that have been stolen.
And it's about remembering that we all have a role to play in demanding justice. In holding those in power accountable. And in creating a world where Indigenous women are safe and valued.
Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with a final thought-provoking question. The article focuses heavily on the need for justice. Which is, of course, absolutely essential. But what about prevention?
Now that's the million-dollar question.
How do we stop these tragedies from happening in the first place?
It's a big question.
It's one thing to demand justice after the fact, but how do we address the root causes of this crisis? How do we create a world where Indigenous women don't have to live in fear, where their lives aren't constantly at risk?
It's a complex issue, but I think it starts with addressing those systemic issues we've been talking about. Poverty, lack of resources, inadequate law enforcement response. It's about investing in these communities, providing support, creating opportunities.
And it's about empowering these communities to reclaim their own safety, their own agency.
Absolutely. It's about supporting Indigenous-led initiatives, amplifying their voices, and respecting their traditional knowledge and practices.
Because ultimately, the solutions to this crisis are going to come from within these communities themselves.
Exactly. We need to be allies to support their efforts, but we also need to step back and listen, to learn, and to follow their lead.
And I think that's a powerful message for all of us, regardless of our background or our level of involvement with this issue.
It is.
It's about recognizing that we all have a responsibility to educate ourselves, to challenge our own biases, and to advocate for change.
You know, one of the things that struck me while reading this article was the way Germaine's family talked about her connection to the land.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
They described her love for fishing, for being outdoors, for the natural beauty of Montana.
It really painted a picture of her as someone who was deeply rooted in her culture, her heritage.
And it made me think about how, for many Indigenous people, that connection to the land is not just a matter of personal preference or enjoyment. It's a fundamental part of their identity, their spirituality, their way of life.
So when we talk about these missing and murdered Indigenous women, it's not just about the loss of individual lives. It's also about a threat to that cultural connection, to that way of being.
It's a violation on multiple levels.
It is.
And I think it's something that's often overlooked or misunderstood by those outside of these communities.
It makes you realize that this crisis goes far beyond statistics and headlines.
It does.
It's about the erosion of cultures, the breaking of families, the silencing of voices.
And it's about the urgent need to protect not just individual lives, but entire ways of life.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to encourage you to reflect on what you've learned, to sit with the emotions this story has evoked, and think about what actions you can take, even small ones, to contribute to a solution.
Maybe it's donating to an organization that supports Indigenous communities.
Okay.
Maybe it's educating yourself further on the history and the current realities of these issues. Maybe it's simply having a conversation with someone in your life who's never considered this perspective before.
Every action, every conversation can make a difference.
And remember, this isn't just about Indigenous communities. It's about all of us.
Right.
Creating a world where Indigenous women are safe and valued is creating a world where all women are safe and valued.
That's a good point.
It's about building a more just and equitable society for everyone.
Thank you for joining us on this incredibly important and deeply moving deep dive.
That was my pleasure.
Until next time,
keep
learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better world.